Letting go of grief. Grief can be so devastating and painful that it sucks all the joy out of life, making everyday functioning an unbearable burden. It literally takes your breath away. 10 years after the death of my first son, Adam, I learned, in my quiet office as Catherine began to remember her past lives, that we are souls and not just bodies, that we are all eternal and will be reunited with our loved ones. But I did not know these things when Adam died. Adam's unexpected death in 1971, when he was 23 days old, turned out to be a guiding force in my work. I grieved after the death of my father also, but more so upon losing Adam, for the loss of a child is an aberration from the natural order of things. All one's hopes are dashed, the heart is torn. The pain is immeasurable and unspeakable. I know its depths firsthand, so I can empathize completely with others who are going through the process. Since that time, I have learned about the continuity of consciousness after the death of the physical body. I have learned that our loved ones live on, that they are simply on the other side, and that we will meet them again and again. When the fear of loss and death is removed, grief ceases to be so suffocating. These 5 stories demonstrate how acquiring spiritual wisdom can heal grief and restore peace and inner calm in our lives. They remind us that love is never lost. Past life memories, prenatal and infancy memories, and mystical experiences are just a few of the ways in which this knowledge can be gained. Perhaps reading the words in this chapter is another. Once the terrible burden of grief is lifted from our shoulders, we feel lighter and more alive again. I have lived this process, and I know the gratitude of being revived. Let these stories breathe life into you, too. A vast explosion of love. My husband, Richard, and I had a stressful marriage and 4 great children. My husband, Richard, and I had a stressful marriage and 4 great children. When he retired as an airline pilot, we moved to my home country, South Africa, to the small town of McGregor in the Cape Wilderness. Here, surrounded by mountains and the beauty of the wild veldt, I was looking for something that I grandiosely called, to myself only, the meaning of life. I found the 5 books that Dr. Weiss had written. With joy I read and reread them. There was an immediate resonance. This was truth, this was the all-loving, all-embracing meaning that I had sought. My husband said, "Lee, you are being weird." For a few years afterward, we lived as we had before, not unhappily, but making the best we could of it. I went away for 6 weeks to visit our children, and when I returned, Richard was different. He too had read Brian's books. With delight, we found that we could now talk openly together about anything, and the following months were the happiest that we had ever shared. We were able to say that we loved each other unconditionally for the first time, and we both began the changes that were necessary, but now possible, together. In 2002, we went to France to look after the house of our oldest son, Will, when he and his wife were away. The joyous relationship continued and grew. We went to Andorra, and at dinner in that lovely country beneath the high Pyrenees, we talked of the utter joy that we both felt. Richard said to me, "If I die tonight, Lee, everything is worth it for what we have now." Richard died 2 days later of a massive heart attack. I was with him in the ICU at the hospital. His last words to me were, "I love you forever," and a whispered, "We won." Our 2 older sons flew in, and on that midsummer Sunday we held each other and wrought our grief, rocking and saying nothing all day but Richard's name. That evening, Will went to walk his dog across the lane, and James, our second son, offered to accompany him. As they passed the gate, I heard Will say, "Dad built these gateposts for me last year," and James clung to one and stayed there. Alone on the patio, I rocked and cried, took a small, shuffling step, and stepped into total peace. I held my breath so as not to break it, but I had to breathe again. The peace remained. Gasping, I whispered to myself, "Oh, Richard, if you were here and I told you about this, I know what you would say. You'd say, 'Lee, you are being weird again.'" At that moment, Richard's arms came around me, and he held me tightly. In only my right ear I heard his voice. He said, "Weird, Lee, you don't know the half of it. It's so wonderful." I turned into a block of ice. Dimly, I felt my sons return. I felt them turn me and sit me in a chair at the patio table. I kept my eyes closed and wished that I could tell them what had happened, but they were both skeptics, and they did not need a mad mother just then. So I simply held their hands. Suddenly, James tore his hand from mine, and as I looked up, his face was red and he was shouting. James said, "It's no good. I have to tell you. I'm mad, but when I stood by the gatepost, I felt the loveliest peacefulness. As I started to feel so guilty, Dad put his arms around me, and he said, only into my right ear, James, it's all right. Everything is exactly as it is meant to be." Before I could say anything, Will flung both arms over his head and said, "Oh, thank you, God. Thank you, James." I thought I was mad too, and I'd have to give up my job because you can't have mad pilots. It was the same for me. I stood at that fence there and felt such blessed relief and total peace. Then, as I started to feel guilty, Dad's arms held me, a real dad hug, and he said into my right ear, "Will, oh Will, everything is as it is meant to be." He told me to open my eyes and look, and I could see through everything, and it was all one, and all love. Then did I tell them what had been my contact. We spent the rest of the night silently, except for Will and James saying once to each other, "Certainty." The peace held all three of us through the next days, when my youngest son flew back to McGregor with me and helped me establish a routine. Richard spoke then to me, saying, "This is necessary, and it will not be for long," but I was back in anguish. My grief was so great that I found myself only able to go on if I carried one of Dr. Weiss's books with me wherever I went, even if it was only to go shopping. I told my sister of what had happened with my sons on the night Richard died. She, who belonged to a fundamentalist religion, told me that I was raising spirits, and called me the witch of Endo, and from then on would no longer speak to me or answer my messages. Nevertheless, I was determined to continue to change, to become the person I was meant to be. Crying most of the time, I began to embrace total honesty and openness, learning not just to be loving but to be loved. I walked the veldt alone a lot. On one Sunday morning, I took my 4 dogs for one of our long walks into places where there were no other people at all. These were the times when into places where there were no other people at all. These were the times when I started to have strong memories of another, long ago life, which I thought of as interruptions. I tried pushing these thoughts away until one showed me myself sitting at a candlelit dinner, with rose petals on the table. It was during the Middle Ages. I sat beside a much older, very learned man, whom I could not look at for shyness. I was 16 and in love with him. Looking down at the table, I saw his right hand, a grey sleeve falling from his arm as his fingers played with a walnut, rolling it exactly as Richard had always done with coins and other small objects. My heartbeat raced. Whoever this man was, he was Richard. I snapped out of it and steadied myself. All 4 dogs, still on their leashes, suddenly rushed forward up an incline where Richard had often waited for me when we walked together there. The dogs sat down in a semicircle and wagged their tails, and I felt sure that I would find the peace of Richard's presence as I stepped into that space. And I did, for a moment. But totally clearly, I heard Richard say beside me, "You were born in the year 1100. I freaked out and turned back, dragging my poor dogs, and with every footstep I yelled aloud, "Prove it! Prove it!" as I ran all the way home. I could not stop this reaction, so I immediately drove to see a friend who, although he did not then accept reincarnation, had been very good to me and had known Richard well. This friend, Mani, did not believe at the time that dreams mattered either. I found Mani lying on his bed, one leg bent and the ankle of the other on that knee. He was looking outside to a jacaranda tree in full, gorgeous flower. He gave me no word of greeting as I approached but said only, "Lee. I have had the most amazing dream." Still looking out the window, he went on. "I dreamed that I was in the most beautiful garden. Green lawns of deep grass, and the flowers, oh, the scent of the flowers. I walked along the grass and then I saw Richard coming toward me. We met. We hugged. He asked me if I would do something for him. Of course, I said. Anything, Richard, Lee will be here later, Richard had said. Will you give her a message from me? Then Mani sat up on his bed and apologized. Lee, the message is just gibberish. Gibberish. But I did promise Richard. He looked so sadly at me. He said, "Tell Lee that 900 years ago, I am a big dolphin." 30 years before, as a fighter pilot, Richard had flown in the RAF with the 19th Squadron, whose emblem, he had been delighted to find, was a dolphin. Upon seeing dolphins for the first time, he had fallen in love with them. Showing me his huge English electric lightning with his name on the side, he had pointed out the dolphin on its tail and proudly said, "I am now a dolphin." He later left the raft to join British Airways, and in the darkness one night I asked him if he missed being a dolphin. We talked then about the threat of nuclear war, and Richard had said that if he survived he would get a message to me, but I must never believe a message came from him unless he used the words "I am a dolphin" in it. Until Mani said these words to me again 30 years later, I had completely forgotten this message. For the only time in my life, I fainted. When I came to, I told Mani everything. And, wonderfully, Mani soon enough experienced his own regressions and came to embrace the concept of reincarnation. I accepted it all, but I was still in some sort of anguish. My children asked me what I'd do if I could do anything, and I immediately said, I would like to spend 1 hour with Dr. Brian Weiss. Half an hour later, they had arranged for me to have a cabin on the ship where Brian was having a workshop, sailing from New York. It was in the first session with Brian, shining with love and light on the stage, that I found that hypnosis was exactly like planning a conscious dream, and with Brian's gentle, loving voice, I went back to that earlier life in medieval Paris. It had started with that tremendous love affair with the older Richard. That had ended when, at the age of 18, I was forced to become a nun. Richard became a monk, and I was desolately unhappy for the rest of the life. I saw him in a monk's cell, beating his forehead and arms against a stone wall until they bled, yelling my name out loud. If only I, in that life, had known that little fact, my many years of agony as a nun would have found healing. But that life was the opposite of the life I now live. In the Middle Ages, I had no freedom at all. In my present life, I am incredibly free. I was jubilant to experience this regression. To me, this was the colossal change that I needed. It healed the grief that had felt to me like churning glass inside my stomach and heart ever since Richard died. I was blessed beyond anything I could have dreamed. Additionally, I received a short letter from my sister, who had not spoken to me for several years. She was responding to the experience that I had told her about with my sons upon Richard's death. My sister wrote, "This morning in my quiet time with the Lord, He told me that you and your family were given a vast explosion of love, and that I must keep right out of it." She signed it, "With love." As the years pass now, my life is so very, beautifully, gently, wonderfully different, ever since the first moment I picked up those gently, wonderfully different, ever since the first moment I picked up those books. Leech, this story is so touching and so beautiful that I can only urge you to read it again, and to hear and feel Richard's messages as if you were Leah James Orwell. The messages are so true. I say, trust the process, and Richard says, everything is exactly as it is meant to be, but these are the same concepts. While I write that we never die, that our souls or consciousness continue on after the death of our physical bodies, Richard actually comes forward to show us this and to add, you don't know the half of it. It's so wonderful. Lee's regression to 900 years ago was merely the final validation, and she was now able to understand completely and to feel perfect peace. Her grief was healed. In the 1980s, when I was chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at Mount Sinai Medical Center in Miami Beach, I often meditated prior to driving home in the evening after work. One time, as I began the trip home on a beautiful early winter night, I observed a perfect sliver of moon hanging low in the western sky. A softly scented sea breeze blew in through the car's open windows. A feeling of deep peacefulness filled my awareness. At that moment, a shift in my perceptions occurred abruptly, like a combination lock suddenly opening when all the tumblers are aligned. Solid objects had a golden light around them and no longer seemed so solid. I could almost see through their newly acquired transparency. The feeling of peacefulness expanded. I knew that everything was perfect, there were no accidents, and there was no need to ever worry or fear. A gentle voice then whispered to me, everything is as it is meant to be. Everything is perfect as it is. I understand how far from perfect things seem to be on the physical level. Violence, accidents, illnesses, and other traumas seem to happen haphazardly, unpredictably, and constantly. Lives can appear ruined in an instant. It is only at the cosmic level that everything is perfect and as it is meant to be. Physical life is like a stage play where unforeseen script changes occur all the time, and chaos reigns on the stage. When the actors go behind the curtain, the commotion of the play ends. The actors take off their masks. They resume their permanent identities and lives, no longer the characters that they are temporarily portraying. Our current bodies are the stage characters, our souls the enduring actors. While on stage during the play, the characters can experience terrible misfortune, even death. But the actors are never harmed. In the context of our own immortality, in the eternity that transcends all, soulmate, this is a part of Zindagi Ki Roshni consultancy. It has been established for those who have lost someone and for those who are very sad in their life. About 100 PDF books and 20 short audio books of this topic will be sent to those who join it. This data will be sent to their email or WhatsApp. If you want to join this organization, then please send WhatsApp message to this number.